It was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, and the loneliest of mine. My phone buzzed the night before her wedding. Just 6 words glowed on the screen. "Don't come to my wedding, Mom." I read it twice, then once more, as if the meaning might change. It didn't. I didn't reply. I simply folded my hands, looked at the old blue dress hanging in my wardrobe, and pressed it with care. The one she once said made me look kind. She wanted me gone. But she forgot one thing. I don't disappear. I appear when truth does. Well, I'm glad you're here. If you're watching this, please like the video, subscribe, tell me where you're watching from, and drop a heart if you like the story. The night before the wedding was too quiet. The kind of silence that hums when something is wrong. My phone buzzed once on the table beside me. I picked it up without hurry, thinking it was a reminder or some forwarded message from an old friend. Instead, I saw her name, my daughter's, and 6 words that made my stomach turn cold. "Don't come to my wedding, Mom." At first, I thought it was a joke. She had always been dramatic, sensitive, but never cruel. I read it again, slowly this time, waiting for some follow-up message, something softer, a reason, a correction, anything. But there was nothing. Just those words, sitting there like a door slammed in my face. My hands began to shake, not from anger, but from the kind of sadness that starts deep in the chest and spreads slowly, like water seeping through wood. The clock ticked. Outside, church bells were being tested for Saturday's ceremony. Her ceremony. I had imagined that day so many times. I pictured her walking down the aisle in white, her father's old watch wrapped around her wrist, smiling toward me in the front row. I imagined her voice trembling as she said her vows. But now that whole picture vanished in one message. I sat there, staring at the words, "Don't come." It was simple, final, and cruel in its calmness. My throat tightened. I wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. It felt like I had been replaced, erased even, by people who saw me as something old, something unnecessary. The kind of love that builds a home can also become invisible once the house is finished. I walked into the living room, switched off the light, and sat in the dark. The phone lay face down on the table, but I could still see the message in my head. I thought about all the mornings I woke up early to pack her lunch for school, all the evenings I stayed awake waiting for her to return from university, and all the sacrifices that became her comfort. Every piece of her success had my fingerprints on it, the same hands that now trembled because of her. I knew what this meant. Her fiancé's family had never liked me. They said I was too plain, too modest, too old-fashioned. I didn't have money, but I had decency. I thought that would be enough. I thought she would see through their polished smiles and realize what they were doing. But love, when it's young and proud, can be blind and selfish. She wanted to fit into their world, even if that meant cutting me out of hers. I reached for the framed photo on the shelf, her as a little girl, in a school uniform too big for her. I ran my thumb over the glass. Somewhere in that frame was the girl who used to call me her best friend, the one who'd bring me wildflowers from the garden. I wondered when she had vanished. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I folded my old blue dress. The one she once said made me look kind. I pressed it neatly, smoothed out the wrinkles, and hung it on the back of the door. I didn't know why I did it. Maybe out of habit. Maybe because part of me still wanted to be ready for something. Anything. The next morning, I took my wedding gift from the drawer. A small envelope sealed in white, with her name written in my handwriting. Inside was not money, but something her father had left behind, a clause from his estate, untouched until that day. It stated that she would inherit his assets only after publicly acknowledging her mother. Her father had always said, if she ever forgets where she came from, the papers will remind her. I used to think it was unnecessary. Now, it felt like prophecy. I placed the envelope in my bag and sat by the window as the sun rose. Birds sang outside, unaware that a mother was sitting alone on the morning of her daughter's wedding. I didn't feel anger anymore. I just felt still. The kind of stillness that comes after the last wave hits the shore. She told me not to come, but the law, time, and truth were all on my side. I wasn't going to ruin her day. I was going to remind her who built it. When my husband passed away, the house fell quiet in a way that only grief can make it. My daughter was still in school then, young, curious, and far too bright for the life we were living. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, bills spread out, counting coins to keep the lights on. I worked nights at the local library, cataloging books while she slept at home with a neighbor watching over her. Every penny I saved went toward her future. I didn't buy new clothes. I didn't take holidays. My life revolved around her. Her meals, her lessons, her dreams. She grew up watching me struggle, but I never wanted her to see it as suffering. I wanted her to think of it as effort, something beautiful, something noble. When she went off to college, I sold my jewelry to pay for the last semester. She promised me that when she married, I would sit in the front row, wearing the blue dress her father always loved. That image kept me alive on my loneliest days. But as she grew older, I noticed something changing. It started small. Her tone on the phone became shorter. Her visits rarer. She started talking about her new life, her new people, her new world. I was happy for her, at least at first. I thought distance was normal, that she was just busy building her future. But it wasn't distance. It was disappearance, one polite silence at a time. When she met him, the man she's now married to, things shifted completely. His family was wealthy, polished, and proud. They spoke with soft voices that carried heavy judgment. The first time I met them, I felt it. That invisible wall built of class and money. I tried my best to smile through it. I complimented their home. I brought a homemade cake. I even wore pearls I hadn't touched since her father's funeral. But they looked at me the way people look at an old chair, something that doesn't belong in a new house. After that, her calls became even shorter. I stopped being mom and became mother. My advice was no longer needed. My opinions were outdated. I told myself it was part of growing up, that she was finding her place in the world. But sometimes, people find their place by pushing others out of it. Months passed without hearing from her. Then one evening, I received an invitation, not to her wedding, but to a bridal event hosted by his family. My name wasn't even printed properly. It was handwritten in a different pen. I knew then I was an obligation, not a guest. When I arrived, I was seated at a corner table far from the main group. They introduced me to others as the mother she raised her alone, with that tone of sympathy people use when they pity, not respect. I smiled and swallowed it all, like medicine. After that day, she stopped calling entirely. I watched her life unfold through social media, new photos, new house, new friends. I wasn't in a single frame. Every time I saw her smile, I wondered if she remembered who had given her those teeth to smile with. Still, I kept her room at home just the way she left it. The posters, the books, even the little lamp by her bed, untouched. I dusted it every week, not out of habit, but out of hope. I believed she'd come back someday, even if just for a visit. But instead of footsteps, what arrived was a message. Don't come to my wedding. It didn't feel like rejection anymore. It felt like a statement, a declaration that she had crossed over to another life, one where I didn't exist. But what she didn't know was that I had already prepared for this moment years ago. Her father had told me once, if love ever blinds her, let truth guide her back. He had left behind not just memories, but papers, carefully written, signed, sealed. I never thought I'd use them. But that night, as I sat with the phone in my hands, I realized they were not just documents. They were justice waiting for its moment. She had her wedding. She had her guests. But the truth, the one thing her father and I built together, would be mine to deliver. And I would do it not with anger, not with tears, but with quiet certainty. The days after that message felt longer than any I had lived through. Every morning, I woke to the same heavy thought, that my daughter was going to marry, and I was not invited to witness it. I wasn't even sure if I was still supposed to be called her mother anymore. The silence that followed her text was more painful than the message itself. It wasn't a fight. It was erasure. No invitation came, no phone call. No one from her fiancé's family reached out. It was as if I had been quietly deleted from their version of the story. Neighbors began asking harmless questions. So, what will you wear to the wedding? Will the ceremony be at the church? And each one cut a little deeper. I smiled politely, said, "It's a small family event," and went back inside to cry in private. I didn't want anyone to see what being unwanted looked like. The morning before the wedding, I sat at my dining table with her photo in front of me. It was from her graduation day. She had looked so proud then, standing in her cap and gown, holding the certificate I'd worked half my life to help her earn. I remembered that smile. I remembered how she hugged me, how she said, "We made it, Mom." That was the last time she said, "we." Somewhere between that day and her wedding, I became a burden, an embarrassment she wanted to leave behind. I knew exactly why I was being left out. Her fiancé's parents had made their opinion of me very clear the day we first met. They spoke to me with the politeness people use for strangers they hope to never meet again. My clothes were too plain, my accent too humble, my life too small. I saw how my daughter's eyes darted nervously between us that day. She wanted their approval, and I was in the way of it. So, when that text came, I knew whose words they really were. My daughter may have typed them, but the shame wasn't hers alone. It was taught, shaped, encouraged. She was marrying into a world that demanded silence from me. And for a while, I almost gave it to them. That evening, I sat by the window and watched as cars passed by, carrying laughter and flowers and excitement. The town was buzzing with her wedding preparations. Somewhere across the streets, music was playing. I imagined her trying on her dress, the lace and satin glowing under the shop lights. I imagined her laughing with friends, perhaps mentioning me in passing. Maybe as an afterthought, maybe not at all. Still, I couldn't hate her. I couldn't. Because hatred would have meant that I no longer cared. What I felt was heavier. It was grief for someone still alive. I went to her wardrobe in the spare room and opened it. The scent of her old perfume still lingered there. I touched the fabric of her old scarf, ran my fingers through the dust on her old books, and whispered her name. There was no answer, of course. Only silence. That's when I noticed the small wooden box tucked behind the shelf. The one her father had kept, locked for years. Inside were documents, a letter from his lawyer, and an envelope addressed to her. My breath caught. I opened it and found the words her father had written years before his death. For our daughter, when she marries, this inheritance shall be released upon her public acknowledgement of her mother, the woman who raised her. I read it twice, hands trembling. It was as though he had written it for this very moment. He had always known how easily pride could replace gratitude. That document was my silent shield, not for revenge, but for truth. It was his way of saying that love deserves recognition, not erasure. I placed the letter back into the box, locked it, and felt a strange calm wash over me. I didn't need an invitation anymore. My name didn't need to be printed on a card. It was written where it mattered, on the papers that carried my husband's will, on the years that built her life, on the very foundation of everything she had become. That night, I didn't cry. I ironed my old blue dress again, folded it neatly, and placed the wooden box into my handbag. I didn't know how the day would unfold, but I knew this much. I would be there. Maybe not as a guest, maybe not even as a mother in her eyes, but as the truth she could no longer ignore, because some absences speak louder than applause, and some mothers attend not by invitation, but by legacy. The morning before the wedding felt different. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was purpose. The kind that doesn't shake your hands or make you cry. It just steadies your heart. I woke up before sunrise, dressed quietly, and brewed my tea. The kitchen felt smaller that morning, quieter than it had in years. The blue dress hung neatly by the window, glowing faintly in the dawn light. I touched the fabric and whispered, "Your father would have wanted this. Not revenge, just truth." After breakfast, I took the wooden box from my drawer, the one that held her father's last documents. I had kept it sealed for nearly 2 decades. Inside were the legal trust papers, the clause her father had written by hand, and the copy of his will, signed, dated, and notarized. All those years, I'd believed they were just papers. Sentimental reminders of the life we built. But now I realized they were protection. A message from a man who had seen further into the future than I ever could. At exactly 9, I put on my coat and took the bus into town. My stop was near the solicitor's office, the same man who had once helped my husband set up our small family trust. He was older now, slower, but when he saw me, he smiled like no time had passed. I placed the folder on his desk and said, "It's time." He didn't ask many questions. He opened the documents, read the clause carefully, and then nodded with quiet understanding. The trust was specific. Our daughter's inheritance, the estate, shares, and family property would only be released after her public acknowledgement of her mother. That meant the wedding, being a public event, was the only legal stage suitable for such a declaration. If she chose to deny me, the trust would lock indefinitely. Everything her father built would remain in my name. We updated the paperwork, signed a formal letter for presentation, and sealed it in an envelope with the solicitor's seal. It wasn't a threat. It was her father's truth, written years before pride could rewrite it. As I left the office, I felt no guilt. For the first time in years, I felt in control of my own story. Outside, the city was alive. Florists arranging bouquets, delivery vans rumbling past, laughter echoing down the streets. Somewhere, she was getting ready, surrounded by people who thought they'd erased me. I wondered if she was nervous, if she had slept at all. I wondered if she had any idea that the woman she had told not to come was quietly rewriting the ending of her wedding day. I went home and opened the small jewelry box that had belonged to my husband. Inside was a silver brooch he had given me on our wedding day, shaped like a small dove. I pinned it to my dress. It wasn't vanity. It was armor. Every wrinkle on that dress, every faded thread, told a story that wealth could never buy. Then I wrapped her wedding gift. Not the traditional kind, but the legal envelope with her father's letter enclosed. I added a small handwritten note on top. For your new beginning, from the beginning itself. No anger, no bitterness, just truth folded between paper and memory. I spent the rest of the afternoon in silence. No one called. No one checked on me. The house felt empty, but not lonely. It was as if the walls knew what was about to happen, that something long buried was finally going to surface. I cleaned the table, watered the plants, and placed the envelope beside my handbag. Everything was ready. As night fell, I sat by the window once more. The church bells rehearsed again in the distance. This time, I didn't cry. I only listened. Each toll of the bell sounded like a heartbeat, slow, steady, inevitable. Tomorrow, she would walk down the aisle, radiant and proud. And when she did, the truth would walk right beside her. She had told me not to come, but her father's words were already written into that day. I wouldn't shout. I wouldn't disrupt. I would simply arrive, quiet, composed, dressed in blue, carrying the truth that would make the whole church look her in the eye. Some mothers raise their children. Others have to remind them who raised them. Tomorrow would do both. The morning of the wedding arrived with an eerie calm. The world outside was bright and alive, yet my small house felt frozen in time. I sat on the edge of my bed, hands resting on my lap, listening to the faint sound of birds outside. There was no excitement, no rush, only stillness. I had spent most of my life waking up early for others. But that day, I woke up early for myself. I bathed slowly, pressed my blue dress once more, and pinned my silver dove brooch near the collar. My reflection in the mirror didn't look like an old woman. It looked like someone who had been hurt, healed, and was now ready to finish a chapter quietly. My hands didn't tremble as I buttoned my coat. My breath didn't shake. It was strange. Calm had replaced heartbreak. Outside, the morning air was crisp and carried a sweetness that only new beginnings have. Somewhere in town, laughter and music were already rising. The kind of sounds that mark a wedding day. I could almost picture her in her white dress, surrounded by friends, flowers, and a happiness that was built on selective memory. The thought didn't sting anymore. It simply reminded me that even lies can look beautiful before the truth arrives. I took the same handbag I'd used for every important day in my life, the one that had held hospital papers, report cards, and bills. Today, it carried something far heavier, her father's truth. The sealed envelope sat inside, safe and ready. I didn't pack tissues. I didn't expect to cry. The taxi driver who picked me up didn't ask questions. He just looked at me through the mirror once and nodded respectfully, as if he knew I was going somewhere important. The ride was quiet. I watched the streets roll by, the bakery where I once bought her birthday cakes, the school she used to skip toward with her plaits flying, the park where she learned to ride her bicycle. Every corner held a memory, and every memory felt like it was waving goodbye. When the car stopped near the church, I didn't step out immediately. I sat for a moment, taking in the view: white ribbons on the gate, guests walking in with flowers, photographers setting up by the doors. The sound of organ music floated faintly from inside. It was a perfect morning for a wedding. I just wasn't meant to be part of it. I didn't go through the main entrance. I asked the driver to stop by the side path near the smaller door that led to the old pews. I knew the church well. It was where her father and I were married. It felt strange being there again, not as a bride, not as a guest, but as someone the guest list had tried to erase. Inside, the air smelled of candles and lilies. I took a seat near the back, close enough to see but far enough to be ignored. The guests whispered among themselves, completely unaware of me. I watched them take their places, all dressed in finery, their voices floating in soft laughter. I could see her bridesmaids, glowing with joy. And then the music changed. Everyone stood. She entered, my daughter, radiant, flawless, carrying herself like the world belonged to her. The guests turned and smiled as she walked down the aisle, her hand clutching her bouquet, her eyes fixed on the man waiting at the altar. I felt my heart tighten, not from pain, but from memory. I remembered the little girl who once ran to me after school, who cried over scraped knees, who whispered secrets under the blanket. That girl was gone now, replaced by a woman who thought her mother was too ordinary to love. Halfway down the aisle, she looked up and saw me. For a moment, everything stopped. The music, the laughter, the whispers, all of it fell silent. Our eyes met. Her face froze, the color draining from her cheeks. I didn't move. I didn't smile. I simply sat there, still and calm, my hands folded on my lap. In that single moment, the silence spoke louder than any confrontation ever could. She knew I wasn't supposed to be there. And yet, I was. Not as an intruder, not as a ghost, but as the truth her father had ensured she could never hide from. The priest's voice returned, gentle and steady, continuing the ceremony. But I knew nothing would go as she planned now. The truth was already sitting in that room, and I was holding it. The ceremony had barely reached the vows when the church doors opened again. The sound was small, just a soft creak, but in a room filled with silence, it felt like thunder. Every head turned. I stayed still, hands folded, heart steady. Through the entrance came a man in a dark gray suit, calm, composed, carrying a thin envelope. My solicitor, the one who had worked with my husband years ago. He didn't glance at me. He walked straight down the aisle, respectful but firm, his shoes clicking against the old marble floor. The priest paused mid-sentence, confused. My daughter's face went pale. Her fiancé shifted nervously. A few guests whispered, their curiosity spreading faster than the music had moments ago. The solicitor stopped near the altar, bowed slightly to the priest, and handed him the envelope. Then, in a low voice, he explained that this was a legal matter related to the ceremony, a trust clause that must be acknowledged before the marriage registration could proceed. His tone was gentle, professional. He wasn't there to cause a scene. He was there to fulfill a promise written long before that day. I watched my daughter's face change. The calm, composed bride vanished. Her smile faltered. Her breathing quickened. I saw her turn to her fiancé, whispering something sharp, desperate. He shrugged, confused, looking between her and the lawyer. Guests started murmuring, eyes darting from the priest to me, then back to her. The priest opened the envelope and pulled out the letter, reading it aloud as was required. The air in the church shifted. My name was the first word he spoke, my full name, my husband's name beside it. Then the line that silenced everyone. In accordance with the late Mr. Allen's trust, his estate and assets shall transfer to his daughter only upon her public acknowledgment of her mother, Mrs. Allen, as the rightful co-heir and benefactor present at her wedding ceremony. It was like hearing my husband's voice echo through the walls, calm, precise, unshakable. My daughter's lips parted in disbelief. The words hung heavy in the air, filling every corner of that holy place. For years, she had built distance between us, brick by brick, lie by lie. And now, in the middle of her perfect moment, her father's truth broke through those walls like sunlight through stained glass. The priest looked uncertain, as though unsure whether to continue with the vows or wait for her reaction. Guests were frozen, some whispering, some simply staring at me. I didn't move, I didn't smile. I didn't need to. My silence spoke enough. Her fiancé's parents exchanged looks of embarrassment. Their whispers reached the first few rows. Hurried, uncomfortable. The groom's mother covered her mouth with a gloved hand, her pride dissolving into disbelief. Everything they had tried to polish, every illusion of perfection, cracked right there in front of everyone. My daughter finally turned toward me. Her eyes were wide, full of shock, guilt, and something else. Recognition. It was the first time in years she had truly seen me. Not as a burden, not as a reminder of her past, but as the woman who had built her life and the one whose name her father had protected even after death. The priest continued, his voice softer now, finishing the reading of the clause. It was clear and final. There was no loophole, no argument, no escape. The inheritance her new family had boasted about at every dinner, the property her fiancé's parents had already counted in their minds. All of it now hinged on one thing: her acknowledgement of me. When he finished, a thick silence filled the church. I felt the weight of every stare in that room, but I didn't shrink under it. I sat upright, hands still folded, eyes calm. My heart didn't race, it rested. Years of pain had already done their worst. What was left was peace. The solicitor turned and nodded once in my direction, a silent assurance that everything had gone exactly as planned. Then he walked out quietly, leaving behind a silence deeper than any sermon. I saw her standing there, bouquet trembling in her hands. Her veil no longer hid her expression. She wasn't just a bride anymore. She was a daughter confronted by the truth she had tried to bury. I didn't move toward her. I didn't need to. The truth had already walked down that aisle for me. That was the moment everyone in the church stopped looking at her gown and started looking at me, not out of pity, but out of awe. Because sometimes the woman you erase from your life turns out to be the one name you can't escape in front of the world. For a long moment, no one spoke. The air inside the church felt heavy, as though every breath carried the weight of judgment. My daughter stood motionless near the altar, her veil trembling slightly, as if the silence itself had hands. The priest still held the letter, the one that carried my husband's handwriting, the one that turned her perfect wedding into a mirror of truth. Then he continued reading, slowly this time, each word measured and solemn. It wasn't just a legal clause anymore. It was a message, not from a lawyer, but from a father who had seen what pride could do to his child. The clause stated clearly that the inheritance, the estate, and all attached assets were entrusted to our daughter on one simple condition: that she publicly acknowledges her mother, Mrs. Allen, as her rightful family and co-heir. Every sentence in that document was carefully chosen. I knew because I had sat beside my husband years ago when he dictated it. He had insisted that no wealth should ever come before respect. If she forgets where she came from, he had said, she must be reminded by the foundation her life stands on. At the time, I thought it was sentimental, a father's love written in legal ink. But now, watching the color drain from her face, I realized he had written it for this exact day. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. People looked between us, unsure what to believe. Some pitied her. Some admired me. The groom's parents looked horrified. They had expected a flawless wedding, not a courtroom revelation in lace and flowers. I didn't take pleasure in their discomfort. This wasn't revenge. It was truth reclaiming its place in public. My daughter's lips trembled. I could see her mind racing, calculating, defending, trying to make sense of what just happened. But there was no denying what was written. Her father's handwriting, his signature, and the official seal at the bottom, all undeniable. Even if she wanted to dismiss me, she couldn't erase him. As the priest finished reading, the guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Someone coughed. Someone whispered, "Is this real?" But I didn't move. I stayed seated in the last pew, calm, my hands folded neatly. I didn't need to speak. My presence had already said enough. Then, slowly, the realization dawned on her. The envelope I had sent days earlier wasn't just a gesture. It was this. The gift she had dismissed, unopened, contained the very clause that was now being read aloud in front of everyone. The one that tied her future to the woman she tried to forget. I remembered sealing that envelope myself, pressing the wax with my husband's old signet ring. I had written one line on the front. For your new beginning, from the beginning itself. At the time, I wondered if she would understand it. Now I knew she never had, but the law had made her understand it for me. The priest cleared his throat, unsure how to continue. The groom turned toward her, whispering something urgent. His family stared at her, visibly shaken. They had believed they were marrying into an inheritance, a house, a fortune, a name with weight. But all of it now hinged on one word: acknowledgement. Finally, she turned to face me. There was no arrogance left in her eyes, only shock, confusion, and something fragile. Beneath it, maybe guilt, maybe understanding. For a brief second, we locked eyes, and the entire church faded away. The flowers, the music, the whispers, none of it mattered. It was just us, a mother and a daughter standing on opposite ends of truth. She took a step forward, then another. Her dress brushed against the marble floor, her bouquet trembling. The priest waited. The lawyer waited. Everyone waited. When she finally reached the aisle where I sat, her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to speak. But no words came out. She didn't need to. That moment, her eyes on mine, the silence between us, was acknowledgement enough. The law didn't need her apology. The world didn't need her speech. Her hesitation was confession. Her father's words had done what I could never do with tears or forgiveness. They reminded her who she was. I didn't rise. I didn't touch her hand. I simply nodded once, slowly, a gesture that said, "It's done." Then she turned back to the altar, pale and shaken, but different. The arrogance had melted, replaced by something raw and real. The solicitor, standing quietly at the back, caught my eye for a brief second and gave a subtle nod. The document had served its purpose. I felt no triumph, only relief. My husband's final wish had been fulfilled. And as I sat there, among strangers who now looked at me with awe instead of pity, I realized something simple. Truth doesn't need to shout to be heard. Sometimes it just needs to arrive, dressed in paper, sealed with love, and delivered at the perfect moment. The moment the letter ended, the church filled with a kind of silence that felt alive, heavy, trembling, aware of itself. I could feel every eye on me, but no one spoke. The priest lowered the paper slowly, his face pale, unsure what to do next. The guests didn't look at the bride anymore. They looked at me, the woman who wasn't supposed to be there, the one they'd been told to forget. My daughter stood at the altar, her hands shaking, her bouquet trembling. For years she had hidden me from her new world, embarrassed by my simple clothes, my small house, my quiet manners. She wanted to rise above her beginnings, to build a story that didn't include me. But now, in front of the priest, her husband, and the crowd she had chosen over blood, she stood exposed, not by scandal, but by truth. I didn't take pleasure in it. I didn't need to. The room itself did the work. People whispered, some with sympathy, others with shame for having believed her lies. A few avoided meeting my eyes, embarrassed for being part of the same circle that had pushed me aside. It was strange how quickly judgment shifted direction once truth had a name. Her fiancé's mother, who once called me unfit company, sat rigid, her gloved hands twisting in her lap. Her husband stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched. They had wanted wealth, status, and clean family lines. Instead, they got a public reminder that kindness and history weigh more than money. My daughter took a step down from the altar. Her veil brushed the ground, dragging with it the last pieces of the pride she had worn so proudly. Her lipstick had faded, her eyes wide, as if she had just woken up from a long, comfortable dream. She walked slowly toward me, each step echoing through the hall. I didn't move. I didn't stand. My body was calm, still, anchored in something much deeper than anger. For years I had begged for recognition. A phone call, a letter, a visit. Now I didn't need to beg. She was walking toward me, and the entire world was watching her do it. When she reached my pew, she hesitated. The bouquet slipped slightly in her grip. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. The look in her eyes was not hatred anymore. It was confusion. The kind that comes when you realize the person you pushed away is the same one holding your foundation. I thought she might fall to her knees or embrace me, but she didn't. She just stood there, trembling, trying to form a sentence that never arrived. I simply nodded. One small, calm nod that said everything words couldn't. She understood. So did I. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It was acknowledgement, quiet and honest. And for me, that was enough. The whispers behind us faded into stillness. Guests avoided taking pictures. The priest cleared his throat softly, unsure whether to continue the ceremony. The groom stood frozen, torn between embarrassment and duty. I could almost hear his mind spinning, realizing that the woman he was marrying wasn't the person he thought she was. Not because she had lied, but because she had hidden the truth. I sat for a moment longer, letting the weight of the moment settle. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't humiliation. It was balance. A lifetime of silence corrected by one public truth. When she turned back toward the altar, I saw her shoulders slump, her steps slower, humbler. The arrogance that had filled her before was gone. The applause that should have followed the vows never came. Instead, there was a quiet respect that filled the church like sunlight after a storm. As I watched her walk away, I felt no anger left in me, only release. Years of pain, years of distance, all undone by a single letter read aloud in a church. My husband's wisdom had done what time and tears never could. When I finally stood to leave, no one stopped me. No one dared. The guests stepped aside as I walked down the aisle, their eyes following me, not with pity, but with something closer to reverence. The woman they had once dismissed had just rewritten the story, quietly, gracefully, without raising her voice. I didn't look back at her. I didn't need to. The truth was already standing behind me, echoing through every pew, every whisper, every silence. That day, I didn't lose a daughter. I regained myself. I left the church before the music started again. The air outside was cool, sharp, honest, like the kind of silence that doesn't ask for approval. Behind me, the bells rang, soft and distant, but they didn't sound like celebration. They sounded like closure. I didn't hurry. I walked slowly down the stone steps, holding the small handbag I'd brought, the same one I'd used for every important day of my life. No one followed me. No one called my name. Inside that church, the story had already ended. Whatever they said after, the speeches, the dancing, the smiles forced for the cameras, none of it mattered. The truth had already been spoken, and it didn't need a stage to echo. My taxi waited by the gate. The driver looked at me through the mirror, curious but polite. He didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. There was something about the way I sat, the way I looked out the window, that told him this wasn't an ordinary wedding guest leaving early. This was someone who had just finished something. As we drove away, I saw the church shrinking in the distance. The white flowers, the guests spilling out into the courtyard, the blur of my daughter's dress near the door. She looked small now, almost fragile, like a memory already fading. I didn't hate her. I pitied her. I pitied the years she had spent pretending that love was something you could replace with reputation. When I reached home, I didn't take off my coat right away. I stood by the window, watching the afternoon light fade across the garden. My hands were steady. My heart was quiet. The same home that once held my tears now held my victory. Not the loud kind, but the kind that breathes peace into your chest after years of noise. I made myself a cup of tea, the same way I always did. 1 spoon of sugar, no milk. The kettle whistled, gentle and familiar. I thought about my husband, his laugh, his patience, the way he always knew when to act and when to wait. He would have been proud today, not because of what I did, but because of what I didn't do. I didn't shout. I didn't humiliate. I simply let the truth stand on its own feet. That was enough. Later that evening, I packed away the blue dress I had worn, the same one she used to call my kind dress. I folded it neatly, placed it in the drawer, and smiled faintly. It had served its final purpose. It had seen the story through. The next morning, I called my solicitor. I told him to finalize the trust adjustments and send me the confirmation copy. His voice was calm, respectful. "You handled it with grace," he said. I thanked him and hung up. There was nothing more to say. I didn't watch the news or check the social pages. I knew her wedding would appear in a few photos, smiling beside her new husband, pretending nothing happened. But she would know. Every time she looked at those pictures, she would remember the moment her father's letter was read, the silence that followed, and the mother she had tried to erase standing quietly at the back. In the days that followed, I began to breathe differently. I took walks in the park, planted flowers in the garden, and even joined a small reading club in town. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small or forgotten. I felt present, the way light feels when it finally breaks through curtains after a long night. Revenge was never the point. Exposure wasn't the goal. It was justice, the kind that restores, not destroys. I didn't need applause or forgiveness. I just needed my name back, and I had it now, sealed in law and spoken in truth. Every once in a while, I imagine she'll visit. Maybe years from now, maybe with children of her own. And when she does, I'll open the door. Not as the mother she ignored, but as the woman she finally learned to respect. That thought doesn't hurt anymore. It just rests quietly in me, like a page finally turned. That day, I didn't just leave the church. I left behind every piece of myself that had ever begged to be seen. And as I stepped into the soft evening light, I realized I hadn't been uninvited to the wedding. I had simply been meant to arrive at the right time, not for the ceremony, but for the truth. That night, I sat by the window with a cup of tea and watched the moonlight settle across the garden. The world outside was still. No noise, no music, no more pretending. The same blue coat I had worn to the wedding hung over the chair beside me. I could still smell the faint trace of lilies from the church. For a long while, I just sat there, letting the quiet fill every part of me that had been empty for years. It's strange how peace arrives. Not loud, not grand, but slow and steady, like a whisper that finally reaches your heart. All my life I had chased approval. From my husband, from my child, from the people who thought respect came with money and manners. But tonight, sitting alone, I realized I didn't need any of them to feel whole. I had proven something, not to them, but to myself. When my daughter told me not to come to her wedding, I thought my story had ended. I thought I had lost her forever. But now I see it was the beginning of something else. The moment I learned that dignity isn't something you ask for. It's something you stand up and take back quietly, even when the world isn't looking. People talk about revenge as if it's fire, burning, destructive, loud. But this wasn't revenge. This was truth, steady and unshakable. It didn't need flames to be felt. It just needed a moment to stand in the light. I thought about the faces that stared at me inside that church. The pity, the shock, the respect. They didn't know the years behind my silence. They didn't see the long nights I spent alone, wondering where I went wrong, or the countless times I picked up the phone and stopped myself from dialing her number. They only saw the ending, a woman who refused to stay erased. If someone asked me now whether I forgave her, I wouldn't know what to say. Forgiveness isn't a word I use easily anymore. Maybe it's not about forgiving or forgetting. Maybe it's just about remembering differently, without pain. I smiled when I thought of my husband. Somewhere, he must have been watching, proud of the quiet strength I carried through all of this. His letter, his foresight. That was his last gift to both of us. He didn't just protect me. He reminded our daughter that truth, once buried, always finds its way back. The law doesn't have emotions, but it has memory. And that day, it remembered me. I took another sip of tea, feeling its warmth move through me. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad either. I had simply reached the part of the story where everything finally made sense. I looked at the camera. The same one I used to send birthday messages she never answered. My reflection looked different now. Older, yes, but stronger. Wiser, not broken. And if I could speak to anyone listening, to the mothers, the fathers, the forgotten ones, I would say this. Sometimes your children will walk away. They'll tell you you're outdated, embarrassing, unnecessary. They'll shut you out of their perfect new lives. But one day, they'll learn that you can't rewrite your history without facing who wrote it. So when they push you aside, don't shout. Don't chase. Don't beg. Just wait. Truth has its own timing. My daughter told me not to come. I obeyed, until my name was spoken not by invitation, but by law. And that moment was worth more than any seat at her wedding ever could be. So tell me, if your own child tried to erase you, would you fight with anger or with grace wrapped in paper and sealed in truth? I finished my tea and turned off the light. The night outside was calm, the kind that feels like a clean ending. I didn't cry. I didn't smile either. I just breathed deeply and freely, knowing that for the first time in many years, my story belonged to me again.